Good morning, people of the internet. You're listening to Debi Radio 79.5 FM, a podcast where we discuss the movie Grosse Point Blank, 1 minute at a time. I'm your host, Dev Sodiga.
And I'm your co-host, Hugh, and on today's show, we're going to be looking at minute 5, starting with a sedan coming over a rise way too fast out on the edge of LA, and ending with Dan Aykroyd's character Grosse finishing a particular pitch to Martin Q. Blank, played by John Cusack. Joining us today on the show, our guest of this episode is Neil McKay of the Man with the Music Minute Vodcast. Welcome, Neil.
Hello.
How are you, sir?
I'm good. How are you?
Not too bad, not too bad. England is cold and rainy. How is Melbourne?
It's nice and sunny today. We're coming into spring, so getting all the sunny weather starting. Before I know it, it'll be 50 degrees, and we won't be able to go outside because it'll be too hot.
Yeah, true. I envy you. The school I work in only just switched the heating on. It's 6 degrees in the morning here when I go out to work, although it is going up to 10 in the day. So, but it's the rain. We've got Storm Ciarán has hit our shores, and it is just pouring down. There's flooding all over the places. So, anyway, Dev, what's it like in California?
As I've really struggled to believe that the weather in California ever changes. It feels like it's basically always slightly too hot for me to be comfortable, and way too dry and like a tinderbox. Like, it really doesn't matter what time of year it is. Sometimes it's a bit greener, I guess. And occasionally there's rain coming from the sky, which I've forgotten that even happened.
Right.
But
so this means that the scene in question in minute 5 in Grosse Point Blank means that it could have been shot at any time in the year in Los Angeles, outside Los Angeles, because it's sunny, it's dusty, it's dry.
Exactly. It's pretty much any time. Mont Blanc is wearing a jacket, although we learn that he seems to wear a jacket no matter what the weather is like.
Well, yeah, it's formal. He's wearing one of the slightly baggy end of the 80s style, although it's the 90s, but his suit is slightly out of date.
Yeah.
And then Aykroyd's character Grosse, when he steps out of the car, is dressed in a much more casual fashion. He's got a windbreaker shirt. You can see his paunch a little bit. And
I mean, he just dresses
basically
like a detective, right? He literally dresses like he's a detective.
Well, that's the thing that's interesting. When you look at the way the flat top haircut as well, he looks like an ex-army guy, right? Who's got some kind of basic, like he's a security guard or a cop, or as you say, mall cop or something. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. I wouldn't even go so far as to say he's a pro cop. He looks like it could be he doesn't look quite that,
Yeah.
He there is a definite sense that they are different classes, right?
Yeah.
There's a different sense that Aykroyd is a working class guy.
Yeah.
Even though he comes across as, he's Aykroyd. Aykroyd usually plays people who are, very well educated in Trading Places and Ghostbusters in particular set that standard. And so I find it kind of interesting to hear his take on that. This guy obviously got through high school, but then went and joined the military or something. Do you know what I mean? He speaks, he has enough education to speak well, but he sounds like some of the time he's making it up as he goes along. This sounds formal, I'll say it. Whereas Martin Q. Blank knows what he's doing.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
Stylistically, they both have very different and yet similar middle-class sedans that they've obviously rented. Like, these are not their cars. You do not associate those cars with these people who are standing that buy their cars.
Right. Part of me wonders if these people even have cars, because they're traveling so much. It feels that they just live going from rental car to rental car.
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, if you go back to the sort of pulp fictions that this is based on, the kind of books that, I'm thinking of like the late Donald Westlake's series under his pseudonym Richard Stark about the professional thief called Parker, which has been filmed 4 times, but only once has anyone actually used his name Parker, which is quite one of the weird ones. But it's one of my favorite crime series of all time. As I said, they've done 4 films in English and 1 in French, and it's a fascinating series because the character is properly hard-boiled. Like, there are times when he will do terrible things because he's a professional and he just needs to cover his tracks. But also, he's a person who uses plastic surgery a lot to cover his tracks. So because he's an independent thief, but he tries to avoid operating in mob territory, but he ends up entangled with the mob in the first couple of books. And so one of the cool things about that is that if they ever did like do it properly as a TV series or something, you could have different actors. But the way he behaves is very much set the pattern for a lot of movie heroes, because the first movie adaptation of the first book is the legendary movie Point Blank
Oh,
with Lee
okay.
Marvin,
Yeah.
shot by the Irish director John Boorman, which is
Right.
widely considered to be the first true noir in colour,
Yeah.
and which also uses locations that are now absolutely bog standard in LA, but that was the first time that they were filmed in, including Alcatraz. And it's a legendary film. Marvin plays an amazing version of a hitman, and he's a guy who, well, he's a robber, not a hitman. But what's happened is he's basically a hitman now because he's out for revenge. He's been left for dead after a robbery, double crossed by his partner, and the money's gone. And he wakes up and he's like, "I want my money." And he goes after whoever's got it. And it
Yeah.
turns out that the double crosser is because the partner was trying to get into the mob and he wants to buy his way in. So the mob
Yeah.
now has his money, and the character cares so little about the whole money. He wants his share. So every time he beats up or smacks around mob people, they're like, "Have the money," and he's like, "No, I just want this much." They're like, "You're doing this to us for that much? Is that all?" And it's that dedication and that drive, and it's and the Grosse Point Blank, like that's the first thing most movie critics are talking about. Is this is clearly a reference to that movie, but when you watch the movie, it doesn't feel like a reference in any way, because you like nobody in the movie is out there to do what Lee Marvin does. Nobody's out there tracking down the money. No one's out there like, "I'm out for revenge." It's much more 90s. It's
Yeah.
touchy feely and conversations and can I get my girlfriend back?
I
And I love that.
I actually struggle to believe that this film is in any way really related to the Lee Marvin movie,
No,
because
it's not. I think
it's I think it's just point blank is a term that everybody knows in
yes,
shooting. And
yes,
actually, something that we were talking about in minute 3 has kind of sprung into my head, which is obviously it's a play on Grosse Point, Michigan, which is, wealthy suburb of Detroit,
mm,
and Martin Blank's name being Blank. But I think
mm,
also it's a play on Grosse's name, right? Grosse
yes,
is the gross of Grosse
yep,
Point Blank.
yeah,
So
Yeah.
yeah,
it's
and
it, and that elevates his character as well, I think, into being this duality between these two characters rather than just Martin Blank's redemption story.
mm, mm. Well, I mean, I think this is the thing about whether or what kind of film is it, because it is such a blend of different kinds of films. The musical jukebox style that we talked about in the last couple of minutes, makes it feel like a musical that isn't a musical, right? We've replaced the dance scenes with with combat scenes or emotional pirouettes around each other, right? Like when Minnie Driver and is when we introduced the Minnie Driver character later in the film, some of the way she and Martin interact as characters, Debbie and him interact in a way that's almost like a dance, but it's verbal. So you've got that aspect. You've got the crime aspect, which is the thing we just mentioned with in the last couple of minutes with the assassinations, the guns, and all of that.
Yep.
The thriller aspect, but then you've also got um, the that sense of like there's a version of this film, like if you replace Cusack, there's a version of this film and you replace Billy Driver, like a more 80s version of this film where the action stuff is the big thing and it's the two assassins against each other and the girlfriend gets in the way and she's all screaming and all the rest of it,
Yep.
and it's just over the top, and you can see how this is not that film, and yet there's like a version of it. Do you know what I mean? It's like
Yeah.
this is the
Absolutely.
90s comedic,
Yeah.
sardonic Gen X take on
Yeah.
80s action.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this minute for me is a little different to last minute. Last minute, I felt it's a beautifully framed minute. It kind of has its whole story wrapped up nicely within the context of that minute. This minute starts so promisingly, like it's a new scene. You've got Dan Aykroyd rocking up and basically introducing himself, and then it cuts off excruciatingly, like halfway through this dialogue, and it kills me because this dialogue, this scene, is possibly the biggest reason that I have watched this film so many times.
What?
This dialogue between these two characters is so different to anything you get out of Hollywood these days. these characters are alluding to things, they are referencing things, they are not explaining them ever. They're talking about East German ex-Stasi dudes who, like,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I I can't imagine you're expecting the audience to necessarily be aware of who the Stasi were.
Mm-hmm.
Like in this film, you're talking about Burma, T-34s, like no exposition, no like hand holding people through this,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
this is the first scene where we get a uh, a thread dropped that isn't actually in any way making sense until we're another 20-30 minutes into the movie, right, with the Boudreaux's coming for you
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
bit, which is technically in minute 6, not minute 5, but it's part of the scene. And trying to absorb and understand everything that these guys are saying in this scene, I think I must have watched it 10-15 times before I really felt like I understood what every line of this dialogue is really about. And I can't think of many other movies that give you that complexity and that opportunity to re-experience the thing over and over and over again to get them, and certainly not at the weight. I don't know the right word. This is not a heavy movie. This is not an intense movie. This is not a thinking movie, but it brings that in. This is a light action comedy.
Yeah.
I see your look of disbelief there, Hugh, but it really is, generally speaking, a light action comedy. There's no expectation that you actually absorb any of what they're saying here, particularly, except that you know, Grosser seems to want to buddy up to Blank.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like when I was growing up, I spent so long watching movies and not understanding any of the dialogue. There's so
Mm-hmm.
many from like Star Wars with their weird sci-fi names and things to just
Mm-hmm.
strange Hollywood, well, not just Hollywood, but strange Americanisms that you pick up
Mm-hmm.
after years and years of watching it. As a kid, you watch these things and you think, what are they on about? What? And you're learning about life in general anyway. So they might mention some country that you don't know anything about, or some, the name of a tank that you've never heard of, and just
Mm.
movie going as a kid is kind of learning about how people talk, how what the world is all about, and this kind of dialogue is so thick, and you just I've watched this a few times, and I still have no idea if he was happy with the sale of the tank or not. He said, I really took a bath on that one." What was it? A
Okay,
bath with champagne and bubbles, or was it a
yeah.
bath
So
that he
I
was drowning?
literally
Or what?
had the exact same question as you, the exact same question right up to last week. And I actually, when I was prepping for this minute, I literally had to look up what the phrase taking a bath in a context of a like financial transaction means.
Wait,
And
you
it
didn't know
means
what that meant?
I didn't know.
Ah, okay.
Like
All
I had
right.
always
All
kind of
right.
assumed
Okay.
that it meant he made a bundle on it. And
No,
it's the exact opposite.
it's the
Like
exact opposite. Yeah, yeah. You take a bath on something, you've done badly.
yeah. Yeah, so I literally learned that
Ah.
last week.
Okay, fair enough. I think you guys, this is quite interesting, really, to me. Very interesting to me in a number of ways, because what you guys are talking about is actually a known technique for screenwriting, right? And it goes back to crime novels and pulp fictions in particular, where you were paid, you had to write the least amount of words possible, to get published quickly, right? And you were paid, and you might have been paid by the word, but that just meant you had to do another book next month, um, it go, so the epitome of this style is Ian Fleming in the 50s, right? It's brand names. You don't say the man pulled a gun, right? You say the man pulled a 9mm Mauser.
Yeah.
Now, you don't know, if you're a civilian, you don't know what a Mauser is. You don't even know why there's 9mm in front of it. But you are vaguely aware that this is a gun because in the next sentence, it fires or what have you, right? It's the same with the drinks. He doesn't order a whiskey. He wants a martini stirred, shaken not stirred, and all of that. Like I don't know how long it was before I discovered what that actually meant, right? And it's the same with everything else. Everything in those books is like where his cigarettes come from. I mean, there was a time, and there was a point, I think, God, it must be 20 years. It must be when this movie came out. Bruce Campbell was at a convention, and he was pointing out the sheer pointlessness of the rubbish that's in James Bond. He was like, everybody here, put your hand up, tell me what car he drives, tell me what brand of watch he wears, and everyone can answer it. And he's like, why do you guys know this stuff? He's like, how pointless is this? He says that story, those films are just selling you stuff. They're not actually there to be, proper storytelling kind of thing. And whether that's his argument, I mean, I'm not, we can agree or disagree. But the idea is that you make your characters sound like professionals in their field who know what they're talking about, so that even if you don't know what they're talking about, what comes across to you is their confidence, their relationship, their emotion. Shakespeare's the other person who does this, right? This is like the thing we always say in schools when we're teaching Shakespeare. You don't have to understand what he says. You have to watch a play, don't read it. Watch a play and listen for the emotion, right? It's one of the reasons why right now, as I'm teaching Romeo and Juliet, we're still using the 90s Baz Luhrmann version. Because even though they use the actual dialogue, it's really clear what's happening. Through the editing and the music and the action and so forth and so on. And so, yeah, I think you guys have hit upon a really key point. This is written in classic American movie style, and I feel like that is a good thing. But I understand why you would feel like it's not a good thing in the sense that it's completely unclear to you as the audience. But then that's the point. You're not meant to necessarily know, but you are meant to get a sense of, oh, okay, these guys know what they're doing. They're from the same milieu. They've encountered each other before. Things maybe didn't go so well between them. But at the same time, they're standing there like a couple of hedgehogs, right? They're all prickly, right? Like they're constantly moving their hands towards their guns and not actually pulling them.
Yeah, you said earlier that there's no dancing in this movie, but I actually
there is. Yeah, no, you're right.
This is the dance of distrust that they've got. They're moving around each other like birds that are fighting for a mate, this kind of thing. It's so funny, and I found it really comical, and just the way that they move, and then they do the little handshake, and then they step back.
The handshake's hysterical because they're shaking with the hand that isn't pulling the gun. And it's also like a comedy version of Sergio Leone's Dance of Death in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and a few dozen more. That thing where they all end up in the bull ring at the end, Clint Eastwood and whoever, and they do the walking around and the whole. There's no reason for gunfighters in the West to do that. That is deliberately a Spanish-Italian thing of saying, we're the bullfighters. Let's pose.
It's peacocking, right? Yeah,
peacocking, and that's exactly what. But these two are doing a comedy version of it because these two are genuinely professional and could draw down on each other at any minute. And they're so close to each other. You want to talk point blank, they are at point blank range.
Yeah.
They are really close. It's a very intimate scene in that sense.
Actually, that's an interesting piece of this as well, is that the character shots are, well, at least many of them in the minute have both characters in frame, even though it's the typical cutting to the person who's talking. You're actually also seeing the other person, seeing how close they are relative to each other, which once you get into a dialogue is often not the case. You often just cut to focus in on the person who's speaking.
I mean, there's some careful choices here. And they also ensure that you can see the framing is also very much like a Western, not just because of what I was saying with the dance, but also the fact that they're outside the city, because it's that classic hero thing, or hero and villain thing of the men of violence are not part of society. So they do not get to be in the city with the rest of us. They are out on it looks like some kind of deserted, former industrial lot or something. Do you know what I mean? It's like it's what we would call brown land here in Britain, brownfield land. It's just wasteland, and it's dusty, and the sun is down on them, and they frame the city in the background of both of them, but also the cars of the horses, right? Like they keep, you know what I mean? It's a very weird, semi-comedic Western thing, and I love it. And I just it's a hugely entertaining way of introducing Grosse's character properly beyond the action beats of the last minute,
Yeah.
where which allows us to know. But yeah, also the thing that Aykroyd makes such an interesting, like I was saying about the whole working class thing. You're saying he looks like a cop, but it's just interesting how he takes that approach and resembles that kind of practical guy. I'm so used to him as being slightly more intellectual, but between Dragnet and this, he's definitely playing a very different kind of guy.
Yeah, I felt that there's the dance that they're doing, but also the way that he moves. He does this weird thing. He puts his hand up to his cheek and kind of it's like he's trying to scratch his cheek or something, and
Mm,
it looks so awkward, and it's kind of like the impression I got of him from this minute is that you really can't trust anything that he's saying. He is. I mean, they obviously don't trust each other, but if
mm,
you just read the dialogue alone, it seems like they're having a nice discussion about why don't you join my union. But
Yeah.
yeah,
with the visuals of it, he has no intention of starting a union, and or if he does, he has no intention of inviting blank to be in it because they're rivals. They wouldn't
yeah,
work together. If it did all go ahead, it would the only point of it would be to so he could control what blank is doing, not to
Yes.
yeah,
share or
Yeah.
anything. So
Absolutely.
I think his physical movements also feed into that kind of you can't trust this guy at all because he looks like
Yeah.
he's trying to scratch his face, but he's not doing it in a normal way.
Yeah.
He's
It's almost
mm,
like a kind of like he's a junkie or something, and he's got that kind of
mm,
the tics, and
yeah,
we actually get some of that explained to us in a later minute as well, which
mm,
as at in the diner scene that we have later on,
yeah,
where we go on to discover more about why Grosse might be a little bit wired, and why
yeah,
he's so hyperactive in this scene, and why the hand gestures are so uh, you know
yeah,
present compared to
yeah,
Martin Blank's very cool, very
yeah,
static.
restrained.
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's also that classic. I mean, it reminds me of the whole. I don't know if you guys know there was this huge debate a few years ago about Quentin Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. There's a scene in that where Brad Pitt's stuntman gets into a fight with Bruce Lee
Mhm.
on a set, off the side of a set of a film they're in, a TV show they're in, sorry. And this is a long running thing in action films about stillness versus movement, right? Bruce Lee brought into action movies something that was there in certain westerns and certain kinds of films, but it's very much reserved for the professionals, which is the person who is economical with their movements, right? And only moves when he has to, but when he moves, boom, right? And then where as opposed to a brawler like John Wayne, right? It's the difference between Eastwood and Wayne, right? Wayne is. I mean, I know he's played different kinds of characters, but you know, he gets into the fights in the bar and throws the punches and keeps rolling with everything, right? And that's Grosse here. And there's a little bit of that as well. There's a little bit of Wayne and Eastwood there going on. And I think there's an almost what I'm getting at is there's an almost like 90s California Zen thing going on here with Martin Q. Blank.
Mm.
But I just want to come back to the script for a minute because Neil, you were saying about the dialogue and what they're saying. It's actually interesting that in one of the few drafts that are available online of the script. So this is the fourth draft. So this is after the original writer Tom Jankwitz, but after Cusack and his friends have rewritten it. It's interesting that at the start of the scene they were both on the phone to each other, and the car comes up, and then they get out of the car and keep talking on the phones, which is really funny. In the original scene, they don't get out of the cars; everything stays on the phone. And he realizes he's been tracked down by Grosse, and then he says no, hangs up, and drives away. I am so glad they didn't do that.
That feels like a kind of it would have been an interesting nod to Bullet if they'd gone that route.
Yeah, yeah, but it's much funnier this way.
It is. It is absolutely funnier this way. But I can see how that could have worked as well.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, so that's this minute because this minute ends at the point where Grosse has finished his pitch for the union.
Yep.
So let's call it a day on this minute, shall we? This was minute 5 of the Grosse Point Blank podcast, Debi Radio 79.5 FM, with your hosts, co-writers, and co-producers Dev Soligar and Hugh David.
Today's guest was the wonderful Neil McKay of the Man with the Music podcast. You can find him at
Linktree/Muamum. That's linktr.ee/MWAMM.
Awesome. And you can find us on all good podcast players, also on YouTube, Twitter X, and Spotify at Debi Radio, and on our website, debiradio.com. And for all of those, it is Debi spelt DEBI. So DEBI Radio. Thank you once again for joining us, and we will be back next week with minute 6.
Thank you. It's been great.
Sure was clear that all of this was new. Concentrating hard like a little girl, smoking for the first time.